to get this hearing underway. Is this microphone? Yes, it is. Thank you, guys. We're going to get the hearing underway. Representative Doyle, if you could lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Or Representative Heffley, I'm sorry.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, if the members would introduce themselves from my left to my right, and I will introduce the members that are online.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Representative Tornecker. I'm from Adams and Cumberland County in the south central part of the state.
Representative Josh Kale, 15th Legislative District, Beaver, Washington Counties.
Representative Alec Rinkavich, 119th District, Luzerne County.
Good afternoon. I'm Tim Twardzik. I represent the 123rd, which is beautiful Schuylkill County.
Representative Doyle Heffley. I represent 122nd District, Carbon County.
And joining us today, we'll also have Representative Rowe here in a couple of minutes, and we'll have members coming on and off online as they get through their day. We have Representative Smith, Representative Marcel, and Representative Struzzi right now, and again, Representative Rowe will be joining us. Representative Rinkavich, thank you for having us here to Luzerne County. If you'd like to make some brief opening statements, then I'll make some brief opening statements, then we will start the hearing.
Thank you. I want to start by welcoming everybody to the wonderful 119th District. We didn't have any pierogi or kibasi festivals today, but we did get the full mountaintop experience with lunch at Adelina's prior to this. Now, just a few weeks ago, as a General Assembly, we embarked on one of our most important duties, and that is our state budget. And one of the most talked about pieces of the budget is state funding for our schools, and that is why we're here today. So the Crestwood School District performs in the top third of all Pennsylvania school districts. We are located in a beautiful community, a hardworking community, and a safe community. We have all the things a family looks for in a school district. We have access to great jobs here in Northeast Pennsylvania. We have access to great housing, major highways, high-speed internet, and access to opportunity. But what you won't be hearing is my first year as a state representative, the Crestwood School District had a structural deficit of $2.7 million. Even a 5.1% tax increase wouldn't fill that void. Furloughs of up to 21 teachers last year and 6 furloughs this year. I had teachers crying in my arms about what furloughs could mean to their cancer medication. And this year alone, parents are calling my office because we may be the only school district without a music, chorus, band, or art program. Now, despite these troubling facts, House Bill 2370 is a school funding policy championed by school districts, schools not even 10 minutes away from us. So the $2.7 million question is, why isn't our school district right here taking a victory lap? And I think that's because only one narrative was shared with House Bill 2370. So today I want to share with you my perspective. Everyone here in Harrisburg would agree that education funding is one of the most complex and convoluted topics that we will tackle. Yet, when we voted on this 87-page bill, it was introduced only 24 hours before a committee vote. That is the statutory minimum for a vote. The majority party then ran a roll call vote on second consideration, which is a highly partisan and, quite frankly, a tactic that doesn't work toward solving a problem. It doesn't work toward building a coalition. It works toward building negative campaign mailers. And so it's clear to me that the 107 state representatives out of the 203 of us think it's okay that Crestwood students are worth less than any other student in the Commonwealth. And I don't think that's right. And so today we have an excellent panel. We're going to hear from Mr. John Macri, who's our Crestwood School Board President, Mr. Rick Nardone, who's our Finance Committee Chair, and Ms. Danielle Petrosky, who's going to talk to us on her as a parent and as a PTA member. And I want to thank everyone for being here, and I'll turn it over back to the chair.
Thank you, Representative. And I appreciate your advocacy for your district. And I think it is important to note, because a lot of this gets caught up in the political fray, but there is consensus in Harrisburg that there needs to be robust school funding. And of course, over the last 5-6 years since I've been there, Republicans have been advocates for public school funding and dramatic increases in public school funding. The questions that we're running into are, how can we best fund students in education? How is it best for the student across the entire Commonwealth? within our education system. And then there's differences and there's disagreements on that. But we certainly shouldn't allow some students to be left behind while giving advantages to other students. We need to have as even of a playing field as we possibly can. So today we're going to talk about how this playing field is not even and what we can do to make it better. So we have three testifiers today. We have John Macri, the president of Crestwood School Board. We have Rick Nardone, the finance director of the Crestwood School Board. And we have Danielle Petrowski, Crestwood parent. Mr. Macri, if you'd like to start, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to start off by thanking you for coming today and hearing some of our concerns about the bill that passed the House. I would like to start out by saying our perspective is how does it affect Crestwood and similar districts, and what approach the House, the Senate, and the overall state bill will be to funding school education in the state. You know, we've said for years that state funding has been minimized for education, and the local taxpayer has been having to bear that burden on an ever-increasing basis. This bill, which should have been to direct that to more fairly fund it and properly fund it throughout all the districts and not just selected districts around the state. It is, in my opinion, that the proposed funding bill negatively affects the Crestwood district by over $15 million over the life of this bill, which spans 7 years to the best of my knowledge. It penalizes the students, the community, the taxpayers through underfunding the district relative to other local and statewide districts on a per student basis. How can a Crestwood student be worth less than $1,000 than other students, even in nearby districts, and so many more districts across the state? While there are exceptions, my general conclusions from the data are quite clear. The proposed bill, which is to meet the remedy for the Commonwealth Court's Pennsylvania ruling, favors two classes of schools: much larger school cities, lower income schools, even in less populated area. There are no metrics for this money. There's no reporting on how it's spent, nor improvement result metrics. There's nothing that basically certifies back to the Commonwealth's taxpayer as to what their benefit is of all this additional money. If you go through and you compare adjustments by each district by tax dollars is not appropriate. You have to look at it by student. So therefore, when I looked at this, I looked at the average daily membership and then divided the dollars into that. And you could see from the information provided, there's drastic differences among local schools and even across the state. One of the biggest driving forces of that is the adequacy tax invoked. And this appears to a layperson to be a tax arbitrarily applied to different schools to lower their amount of funding. If you go through and you look at what the fair funding was appropriated or recommended, Crestwood's fair funding was much larger than what went through in the bill. It was over $8.3 million, and through this adequacy adjustment, it was reduced by over 36%, down to $5.2 million. And $3 million is significant. And if you look at how this bill is structured through the course of the 7 years, that reduction or that tax imposed on this district, its students, and its community will cost the district close to $15 million in less funding. I am not opposed to increasing and rationalizing the funding to the state, to the districts. It needs to happen. But Crestwood and other districts like Crestwood should not be penalized for the advances of other districts that seem to be on a political whim and not to any merit for the taxpayer or the students. In Crestwood's case, this adequacy tax is a very depravity to each student, to the community, and the taxpayer. We struggle each year as a board to be able to balance the budget and maintain a reasonable tax rate. We're at the point now where we have residents in our 9 communities that make up our district that are about to be taxed out of their houses. We have to be careful as a board not to impose those taxes. We need increased funding from the state. The district has a lot of needs. We run a very lean organization. We run one of the leanest organizations in the state. We've cut as much as we can cut. we're now down to, when we look at reducing professional staff and support staff, that's not done lightly by this board or any board. We do not see that as a viable option going forward. We need to have increased funding. We need a funding bill that properly represents what Crestwood District deserves. I'll turn this over to Mr. Nardone.
Thank you, John, and certainly appreciate the opportunity to provide some testimony regarding our situation here at Crestwood. John hit on a number of detailed issues. Yeah, sure. John hit on a number of detailed issues that I'm not going to review, but from the chair's position in the Finance Committee, we look at how do we stretch our limited dollars to maintain the kind of educational opportunities for the students. And as John had indicated, we have done, I think, everything we can do to increase the operational efficiency and perform in a manner that meets the educational requirements of the students. So I come out of industry and I always recognize that you cannot cut to greatness. You have to invest. You can't cut to greatness, you have to invest. And under this funding bill, it seems that our state, at least the proposal, is removing dollars from groups like, or school districts like Crestwood, who has an excellent reputation, an excellent graduation ratio, and allocating those dollars to other organizations. So at our expense, at Crestwood's expense, there's dollars being allocated to other districts. And it doesn't seem a balanced approach to improve, at least in our district. So if you look at how we operate, we are probably one of the most efficient operating school districts in the state. Our cost per student, our administrative cost per student is one of the lowest in the state. So locally, we can't do much more. We cannot consolidate consolidate costs. We can't move students from Rice Elementary to Fairview. We cover a huge geographical area for our students, so it makes it very difficult to consolidate operational efficiencies. We're cutting into the bone now. And to lose the $13 million in this adjustment is, I think, a disadvantage to this district. The other thing that I don't think we're being penalized. I don't think the bill is penalizing the district. What I wish it would do is at least put us on equal par with all other districts. I don't think the folks that put this bill together say, we're going to take from Crestwood or schools like Crestwood and put it somewhere else. I think what happened, or as John had indicated, is there is some number that folks wanted to get for each school district, and they backed into it somehow. Because it doesn't make any sense if you look at the budget per student, or the number of students in the state and the dollars in the budget, we have a value per student. So you have to ask the question, why is Crestwood students worth less than some other students? And I think that is a value question, but it's difficult for, from a finance perspective, to sit here and support this bill in any manner. I think it penalizes us, and I think that there might be some adjustments that can be made that would make us support this in a manner that is conducive to getting more dollars to every school district. You want to take?
Good afternoon. Can you hear me? I would like to thank the Crestwood School Board and state representatives who are in attendance for the opportunity to speak on this matter. My name is Danielle Petrosky. My husband and I have lived in Mountaintop since 2008. We both work and contribute to our community. We have 2 young children in the Crestwood School District at Rice Elementary. We're proud of this school district and the leadership within the school board. As a mother, you want what's best for your children, starting with a strong education. While our district thrives, It's in need of funding to help keep the district moving in the right direction. I have no negativity towards any surrounding school districts, but I can't help but notice how these surrounding districts receive significantly more money than what Crestwood receives. Our district, or I should say our children, are missing out on library and art programs, and the classrooms are overcrowded. Surrounding districts aren't experiencing staff cuts because they have funding to support them. Meanwhile, our district had to cut 9 teachers along with additional cuts in support staff, all of which affect our children. Classes are overcrowded, which adds stress to the teachers and the children and negatively affects their education. These other surrounding districts aren't experiencing these issues. The extra funding they receive is keeping problems like this out of their district. Mountaintop is a popular and sought-after community to reside. Our past students that have graduated have gone on to be extremely successful businessmen and businesswomen, military and law enforcement leaders, politicians, professional athletes, and even astronauts. We want our current students to be afforded the same opportunity. By not receiving additional funding like other districts, we're putting our kids at risk by not achieving their goals. We want our graduates to continue to be hardworking members of their respective communities. Another ongoing concern in our school buildings is that they're old and outdated. The high school was built in 1963. The elementary schools were built in 75 and 76 without consistent upgrades due to the lack of available funding. With the unfortunate topic of active assailants, the safety and security of students should be a top priority. Unfortunately, as we all know, this is an extremely expensive subject. The safety of our students, our children, should not be an everyday concern for parents while they're at school, but unfortunately it is. While other districts are adding bowling alleys and golf simulators and even new buildings, we're struggling to stay afloat when it comes to safety and security measures. With additional funding, our district can tackle these safety measures head-on. Like I said earlier, my husband and I both work, we give back to our community, we support our district. I feel I can speak for many Mountaintop residents by saying it is not fair for the only answer to be raise the taxes, while other communities aren't experiencing this. These other communities don't have the fear of higher taxes because their district doesn't have to raise them due to the funding that they receive from the state. It's only right that our district receives higher, fairer funding like the other surrounding districts to maintain our success rate. The children of Crestwood School District are worth the investment. Thank you all for allowing me to speak on this.
All right. We're going to open it up now for questions. Before we do, I wanted to say that Representative Stender has joined us online. And to those that are online, if you have a question, raise your hand. You know the drill. If I don't see you, shoot me a text. I'll probably see that. If I don't see that, shoot Dan a text. He'll definitely let me know that you have a question. We've also been joined by Representative Ledbetter. It's good to see you. Thank you for being here. And Representative Rakavich.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you to our testifiers. I think this is an interesting subject in Harrisburg because while this bill has passed through the House, it is going to go through the Senate, and our budget is not due until June 30th, so this is still a negotiable product, and I think everyone on this panel agrees that we have to fund our schools. That is not the question we are talking about here today. I think the question we're talking about here today is how is it that Crestwood doesn't succeed under this plan? Because Crestwood is not the only unique school district in this case. And so I want to ask to the panel, I'll either open it up to any of the three of you, can you explain a little bit more about the penalty that Crestwood School District receives? Prior to that penalty, this is a funding plan that could work potentially for Crestwood School District and other school districts that are in that same place. Can one of you please explain how that penalty works and what it means to Crestwood and how we can potentially make this a product that could be workable?
Yes. From our perspective, the adequacy tax was a tax imposed after they decided what each district's fair funding should be to meet the Commonwealth Court's directive. Then they applied the tax basically looking at arbitrary decision from our perspective on did the district tax enough or not tax, and they adjusted that portion accordingly. If you look over, and I included some of that in my submission, There's several local schools that have not had tax increases in over 6-7 years, and yet they're still getting their full funding based on this committee's recommendation. Meanwhile, we're levied a tax of over 36%. Other local districts similar to ours are taxed at even on a higher rate. So it's a significant separation from what the recommendations for fair funding was to what these schools are. My further concern is the stipulation in the bill that says if there's not money available, what gets cut from the bill in the preceding years. So it talks about years 3 through 7. If there's not enough money to fund the whole bill, it basically takes money away from the school districts that have a tax adjudicated on them. That's a major concern. So not only do we lose money up front, but later on, if for some reason the state doesn't have the funding available for this bill, it then takes money away from the schools they already taxed to maintain those schools that are fully funded by this bill currently. That's a significant loss to our students. Even as the bill looks at it, you see the difference between a Crestwood student to other state students. That would even significantly multiply that. Anything to add?
Thank you. I'll open it up to my colleagues for questions.
All right. Vice Chairman Eckert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you folks for being here, and I appreciate everyone in the crowd that's here. This is great to have a great turnout. I'm not surprised because this is an issue that obviously, as Representative Rincavic said, this is an issue that touches a lot of people's lives, and it's one of our most important roles. But when we talk about education funding, we're talking about students, right? At the end of the day, we're talking about educating our students, and anytime we're sending taxpayer dollars, because again, this is taxpayer money, when we're sending taxpayer money dollars out, whether it's through local property tax or state funding, we want to make sure that money is going to educate students. And I know at lunch, Representative Rincavic shared, the great things that this district's doing with, doing a lot with a little, and it's a model probably that we should be looking at. So that's where my questions are leading, because when we look at pushing this money out, we are looking at how do we put accountability, how do we put success measures, performance measures on those types of things so that student success is how this money is being driven out. And I think you, Mr. Macri, you talked about that in your testimony. What are some things that you think we could be looking at as far as metrics are concerned so that we're rewarding schools and using it as a model for other schools to get funding to build up what you're doing?
Right. I mean, I'm definitely a believer that you should be looking at administrative costs per student, and it should always go to students. There's schools that have hundreds of administrators, right? Several hundred. They have buildings built just to house their administration, and that's state funding and local taxpayer funding on a yearly basis. You look at our district, we've really minimized that. I mean, and there could be an argument that we've minimized it even too far because we have people wearing 2 and 3 hats, right? That is a great measurement. Districts shouldn't be having, $30,000 per student administrative costs. So that would certainly be a metric I would be looking at to consider attached to this bill. I'd certainly look at graduation rates. I'd look at how the different pods of students from their different classifications and state testing to make sure there's improvements at each pod, the underperforming, the proficient, the above proficient. Right? We want to see improvement at each one of those levels, not just the highest level students, not just the lower level students. You need to see improvement based across those areas. And schools should be striving for that. I'm sure every school strives for that, but if you're getting extra allocated money, there should be further improvement or at least some kind of reporting guidance on that.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, and I think it's important that you highlighted that. Again, when I'm saying metrics, I'm not just saying state testing. Obviously, I think there are many metrics that you can be looking at. I think you raised some great ones. I think those are the kinds of ideas that we're looking at to measure student success. Right? Is how are we making sure that we're putting money out into our education system and there is some type of success, and it's not just standardized testing. That's
right.
A measure, but I think there are other things that we need to look at as well. So I really appreciate you answering my question.
Rick, anything to add?
The only thing I would add is I understand the administrative cost per student is an important metric, and you can be pretty low on that. But I'm wondering if there's some metric that we can look at where there's a optimum administrative cost per student. Because if it's too low, it's not really good. If it's too high, it's probably inefficient. So if there's a way to identify a variable that brings us to some 5 or 10% variance of an optimum level of administrative cost per student, I think that would be helpful. And then you could determine whether or not a school district is within that range. If they're below the range, there's probably something that needs to be done. If it's above the range, there's probably something that needs to be done. And I think the other thing that's important, I don't know how old these statistics are. And I would ask any one of you, are the numbers of students in the state relatively recent, or are they dated? I tried to find that out, and I could not. The last I was able to pick up was sometime in 2019, and I'm just wondering did I miss something, or is the data relatively recent? I would have nothing else.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fair question. I mean, I think the data tracks a few years behind. I mean, I think COVID, daily enrollment numbers are recent for sure,
Yeah.
I would think. But you know, some of the testing metrics, those things I think are delayed to some degree. COVID obviously had an impact on that as well. But yeah, the daily enrollment, those numbers should be relatively
And
up to date.
one other question I would have is, the reporting that comes from the school district, that's all self-reported, I believe? Is there any audit of the information that the school districts provide to the state?
I'm not. It could be. I'm not an expert on that. And I apologize.
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah.
Thank
Just to add on to that, the one other comment about that funding is how much closely the way that this funding is structured is very similar to how grants through the PDE and the state to schools are awarded. The grants are set up where there are rubrics out there, and those rubrics are based on several factors, but they're the same factors used in this budget formula, which penalizes Crestwood. We apply for countless grants, and we don't even qualify because we have a safe school. Our kids attend school. We graduate. So they go ahead and use the same metrics on this funding, and it penalizes us on two ends. We don't qualify, or we don't get awarded any grants, particularly safety grants, building grants, things of those nature. And yet then we use those same metrics, and we're penalized again in the funding formulation. I mean, those are things where there needs to be some correlation. So when you look at this funding bill, it should be looking at, how are the grants being issued? Are those grants tied into this? There's money on top of this, and how does that factor into their allocation for their yearly PDE funding?
Yeah. And just to follow up on your last question, we have asked the Auditor General to look into some of those types of things, the self-reporting and that type of stuff. So that is something we've asked him to take a look at as well.
Representative McCabbage.
I have a simple question. Do you think this budget proposal, do you think this is a district by district proposal? Do you think districts should look at this per district?
Yes, I do.
See, I see this proposal as a proposal that has winners and losers in it. And one of the things that I don't know if you particularly have an answer for it, but why is it that this is a bill, do you think, or maybe let me rephrase, do you think this is a bill that your staff should be concerned about and what it means for the future of your district?
Yes, 100%.
100%. If we're fully funded by this bill, I think it takes off the table furloughs. It puts back in us adding different programs, different classes, more opportunities for our students. That brings more professionals back into the building and secures those positions for years to come. Without this full funding, we're basically drowning, and this funding as proposed is giving Crestwood a bottle of water to drink as it drowns. If you fully fund this, we'll be able to basically stay afloat and get this going in the right direction and grow from it.
So if Crestwood is one of those losers that we've identified today, why do you think it is that there are school districts that I don't even represent that are calling me, asking me to vote yes on this?
probably because there's some money coming to them. And if the bill doesn't pass, the money that's been allocated will not be there for them. It'll just be delayed because there's no current date that the judicial system has indicated you have to pass a bill. So if it's, if I'm getting $10 this year, I should be getting 30. I'd rather get the 10 than wait 3 more years to get the 30 and get it right. So it's a fear of losing what might already been allocated from a funding perspective. I do want to say one more thing. As John was talking, I thought about at Crestwood, we have a pretty good school district. The community is good, the kids are good, everything seems to work. I get concerned with being a board member if there is a safety or active shooting. We don't have the money to do what we know we need to do. So how does that reflect on us? When we'd like to do stuff from a safety perspective, from a security perspective. We don't have the coin. And it seems this is a penalty to us by taking that, what is it, 13 million? Mm-hmm. 13 million penalty and not allocating it under this current structure. So how does one kind of balance their desire to have the good district, to volunteer your time, to spend hours figuring stuff out? You know what you need to do, and you're being prevented from doing it. And, well, it's probably something we ought to consider.
Representative Heffley, not Representative Doyle.
That's all right. I answered anything like that. Yeah, and I have school districts that will benefit from this, from the current form, from the new formula. I have school districts that won't. I really think what we have here is we have one party who has rushed through a product that was not vetted and didn't consult. I mean, there's a 1-seat majority in the House. It's a pretty much evenly split House. And this bill was rushed out of committee. In 24 hours, it was voted out of committee. It was voted in a timeline that didn't allow for any amendments. So there was no way to amend it. So none of the 202 members of the House floor, 203 members of the House floor could put any amendments on this bill. And that's concerning to me. So the process was flawed. It was rushed. There was a minority of the school funding commission. There was a minority report, and I think you find that somewhere in the middle. What we have right now in the current funding formula is we have winners and losers. Why would we take another funding formula and create winners and losers? I mean, property taxes are a huge issue in my district and most of Northeast Pennsylvania, and yet the proposal doesn't dedicate or require any relief to homeowners who have been overtaxed for many years. It doesn't allow for really any reforms, and the process was flawed and it was rushed, and it shows a lot with what's going on right now in Harrisburg, and it's very disappointing. Certainly would hope that as this bill goes to the Senate, there's going to be conversations and push and pull, and we can get a resolution to it. But just to throw, more and more money out there without any accountability, and then sliding certain school districts and pitting other school districts against each other is not how we should be funding education in this Commonwealth. So certainly, I appreciate your time, and appreciate Representative Rinkiewicz for having this forum here, because it is important that we look at this. I chair the House Human Service Committee in the State House for the Republican Caucus, and I can tell you that that the issues that are in our school eventually come out onto our streets. So we want to make sure that every child has the best quality education, while at the same time every homeowner is going to be able to afford to live in their house. And I don't think the proposal that was voted last week in the State House does not do that. So I'm hoping that we will be able to come to an agreement and get a product that doesn't penalize the Crestwood School District and also looks out for those school districts that have been underfunded over the years.
Representative Rowe.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Danielle, I want to ask you, so from your perspective as a parent, are you a property owner and a taxpayer? Okay, fantastic. Which, this is why I want to specifically ask you from your perspective, because, you know, we can talk about like the fundings and look at the charts and all these sorts of things, and we get a little bit in the weeds in some of them, but the practical reality is that through this bill, the state is essentially punishing your school board for trying to do everything right, right? Like trying to not be a crazy high tax district, for trying to perform well on the metrics, and the state saying, hey, good work keeping taxes down and performance up, now we pull your money, right? Like it's a little backwards. So they're trying to essentially incentivize local tax increases. So knowing you're well connected with probably parents groups, organizations, PTA, what have you, what does that do for the culture and the vibe in the community when the state comes in and says, hey, you did everything right, but now you're being punished for it?
Well, I could say there are a lot of parents who are extremely disappointed, you know, with what we're having to deal with at this point. You know, there are a couple problems in the district. Raising taxes, of course, is going to be an issue. We do have a lot of elderly in the community and people who live off of their Social Security. Continuing to raise taxes is just going to make these people suffer, unfortunately. And as a parent, my concern is with this funding is my children are getting the best education they can get here. I'm not interested in leaving Mountaintop. I love this community. It's close-knit. My children are safe. It's not fair, though, that my kids don't get art and library in elementary school. They're missing out on a huge part of what I remember growing up. And that's like a minimal, like, you know, top-of-the-line, minimal education thing. Whereas other school districts are putting in luxury type of equipment and, oh, we have millions of dollars, let's put in a bowling alley, or we could put in a golf simulator. That kills my heart because my children don't even get to do arts and crafts in school. Or my kids in a class with 35 kids, they can't even get up and hardly move around the classroom because there's so many children in one class. So when I look at this and I see that other districts not far off, whose graduation ratio is significantly lower than ours, are benefiting and probably not going to use this maybe going forward, whereas our graduation ratio is like 99%, and our community will go on to be helpful and, you know, important members and contribute. It saddens me to think that our kids are missing out on this, and I just don't think that we could always just, even if raising the taxes the highest amount wasn't going to help us enough. We need more money, we need more funding, unfortunately, and we can get back to being a more successful district.
How many folks, and this is anecdotal in nature, but I mean, how many folks do you know on fixed incomes in this community?
Oh, I mean, it's tough to me put a number on it, but, you know, we do have some older, you know, community neighborhoods in this area, so it's tough to me to give you a number, and I don't want to be wrong, but I would say people would not be super thrilled about having to raise taxes as a way to get through this issue we're having.
Because it's those seniors, right, or those individuals, people with disabilities that are on fixed incomes, that things like this disproportionately affect the most, right? Those people who are still working, you normally at least get some sort of CPI adjusted raise every year, so you can kind of absorb a tax increase here and there. But our seniors on fixed incomes, they can't absorb those.
Yes.
And so then when you have the state saying, hey, we're taking this funding, go get more of your own, these are seniors who have already paid into the state coffers, who do pay sales taxes, who do pay into these systems. So now they're being told, hey, we're taking your tax dollars, sending them to, you know, some city, and you're going to have to pay more in property taxes to your local district, which is then going to at least a degree, you're going to force them out of their homes. So those people are going to have to sell their homes and then leave the community that they've been a part of building up for so many years.
Yes.
So I think it's definitely not fair what this proposal does to districts like yours. So thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
I want to comment on one more thing. It's a rural community. There's a number of home developments that have gone up. A lot of people that own the farmland are selling their farmland to develop it because they can't pay the taxes on it. So they're carving up their family property to stay in the community rather than, you know, keep the farms or keep the land the way it always has been. I know because I just bought a farm to do that. So it wouldn't be developed. So in order to keep the community the way it's been and not just another big city, you know, we have to take care of these taxpayers in a manner that they can stay where they are. They can stay in their old, you know, family home or the family farm.
But even to add on to that, we, as a school board, going to the maximum tax, could not tax the amount of money that this adjacency tax is taking away from the district, right? If we did it every year, we couldn't do it. I mean, it just gets to the point where you know, it's not possible for us to tax enough to keep up with this. And let's also understand that there's always changing guidelines that the districts, all districts have to meet. There's different things imposed on the districts, you know, whether it's classes, criteria, different types of material or courses you need to offer or services. And a lot of that is disproportionately paid by the local taxpayer. And those are the things that we're having the most difficulty on, and we're mandated to do those, so that takes away from the other basic educational purposes we're trying to provide.
Well, thank you guys very much for your testimony. Thank you for serving the community. I know for speaking for the community and serving. My brother was a school board member for several years, and I know it's tough. You get put between a rock and a hard place a lot of times, so thank you very much for serving.
All right, Representative Ledbetter.
I want to interrupt on that. Just to double down on that point, because I pulled up my notes from last year. I mean, this is an issue that I've been working on since I got elected. I mean, I got sworn in January, and right from the beginning, furlough talks started. Teachers were coming to my office. I was going to school board meetings. I mean, it was certainly drinking from a fire hose from day one. And I remember, and I have it here in my notes, just from your early conversations, a $2.7 million budget deficit last year. The state allows the school board to impose a 5.1% tax before going to referendum. Even with the 5.1% tax increase, that would not have filled the $2.7 million deficit, just to take it from anecdotal to actual statistics.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Rinkiewicz, thank you for hosting us this afternoon. Testifiers, thank you for coming out this afternoon. I apologize for my tardy arrival. The question is directed to Mr. Marcy, Mr. Nardone. When reviewing this, I appreciate the hard work that you both have done in leading this district. I also represent a rural legislative district, and my school boards have experienced similar levels of evaluation, and I would assume or expect them to align with you on some of the points. Mr. McCree, when we look at your experience in the private sector, the money management metric is what comes to mind. And when we look in Pennsylvania funds per student $21,000, $22,000 per student. It's like over $3,000 per student compared to the national average. You just mentioned the desire to be prudent in the tax increases that you pass down to your community, and thinking outside the box and being creative to ensure that you stretch those dollars as far as you can go. Mr. Nardone, in your bio here, it speaks to your experience in negotiating and your time as a deal maker and the buying and selling of companies. So I'm curious if, as a Commonwealth, we're getting one of the largest piles of money per student in the country, and you guys are doing your very best to stretch those dollars as far as they can go. Then when you look at the metrics, where are we falling short and where are the dollars going, so that way then the concerns of Ms. Petrosky and the students that attend here are experiencing? Where is the money being allocated? Because to indulge me just a moment further to perhaps concretize my point, when I go and negotiate for a car, I don't consult with the dealership's finance guy, because I know that that finance guy may not have my best interest at heart. So as members of the community, elected by the community, and as a parent of students who are receiving some of the highest levels of funding in the nation, why are we in this position?
80% of our district's funding goes towards salary and benefits of all its employees. The biggest portion of that is the professional staff. But in all, you look at what the biggest driving force in those increases, it's healthcare. The district's healthcare costs are dramatically escalating year over year over year. You know, last year our healthcare went up by over $1 million. This year we're on pace of it increasing by over $700,000. Healthcare is the primary driver as to where our money goes year over year, right? Contracts, pay raises. We want to have the best teachers. We want to have the most acceptable district. We want to bring teachers here. So, you know, we historically have proportioned a large amount to salaries, but it's the healthcare portion of those benefits that are really driving a nail through the heart of the district. And I'm sure we're not the only district. I mean, that's an area, in my opinion, that, you know, if the state wanted to really take on things, you know, why hasn't the state looked at providing a state level plan like they do to state police, PennDOT workers, or state level? I'm sure that many workers and that many offerings certainly would come to some type of reduction. You know, we're negotiating for 272 people. We negotiate with local insurance carriers and brokers. That doesn't really carry much swing. We're not getting much of a break. The state, on the other hand, has vast numbers and certainly carries a much bigger stick to get a better rate. No different than the PSERS and the retirement. The state basically sends to the districts, here's what you have this many employees, here's your PSER payment. We make that. I don't know why the state hasn't ever looked at doing that on a healthcare basis to lower the cost to the districts. And also, I have to be honest with you, that's a big burden on a board of, community members going out there negotiating health insurance contracts. That is the real driver in costs, to be honest with you. There's the year-to-year cost, but healthcare is killing our district and I'm sure many districts.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I appreciate that. That's helpful context. And I think it's helpful because as a member of this committee and a representative in Harrisburg, people like to use broad strokes in their narratives. And so we've heard today, fund our schools. I want to make sure that we do that. I want to make sure that teachers get what they need, students get what they need. But that broad stroke of funding our schools, sounds like there's an awful lot of other stuff packed into that. And from a position of negotiating for the community's best interest, if there are points in those discussions that you guys do annually that aren't open for discussion or aren't able to be negotiated on, that certainly can reveal why we're here. I'll just make a quick note that there are 34 Pennsylvania school districts that report zero student proficiency in math. And half of all of Pennsylvania's 4th and 8th graders cannot read or do math proficiently. I don't think that that is a reflection on the talent or caliber of the educators and the teachers. I don't think that that is a reflection of the commitment of the school boards to their communities. And I don't think that that is a reflection of the talent and intelligence of the students here within our Commonwealth. I think all of the young men and women in Pennsylvania are very smart. I do think that it is a reflection of disingenuous understanding that is foundational to how we are here and a misappropriation of funds going to where they don't need to go under the guise that it is what's best for the very students that it claims to be advocating for. So thank you guys for being here.
All right. Anybody else? I have a quick, yep, Representative Twardzik.
Oh, thank you so much for your testimony. I'm an alumnus of Shenandoah Valley, which is one of the original schools that sued to try to get the funding straightened out. So I come from a small district and several small districts in School County. Just a quick question. What is a mill worth as far as a tax increase? Do you have that?
One mill is about $239,000.
Okay, and thank you for that information, because what I found shocking, I went to a fireman's parade and I spoke to an ambulance driver, and he was a school board member, and he explained to me, he goes, Tim, do you know what our school gets as a mill because of, what the value of the property in our district is? And I said, no, I don't. He goes, it's $82,000. I said, wow. And then my alma mater gets $61,000. So that tells us how awful and unfair this taxing of property is for schools, because how could a poor district get $61,000 and the best district in, school in my district gets $574,000? That's just unfair. When you try to build a new school in a small town like ours, you'd never build it. You'd build a $150,000 house and pay $12,000 in taxes. So we won't get anybody new. So I'm not sure this is going to solve it, but we do need to find a way to get away from property taxes. Everybody says it's always unfair, and we know it is. And I'm not sure how we get there. Some of our problems are people say, well, how else are you going to raise your money? Well, we hope to get it through maybe an increased sales tax or more personal income tax, but spread out the burden, but take it away from seniors. And there's always this pushback saying, well, the big cities don't want that, because big cities don't care because they don't pay property taxes. A lot of people there rent, and they don't realize, well, your rent is high because you're paying property taxes, but they don't put that together. And I always figured out, it's like, well, Philadelphia and Pittsburgh already charge a higher tax on sales tax, and they still get reelected. So I don't know why anybody else won't ever be brave enough to say, let's change this tax system. But that's something that we need to look at. I appreciate learning from you. I'm glad to hear you're doing your best for the community. It's very sad to hear that there's no libraries, there's no music, there's no art, and unfortunately, this giant piece of paper doesn't fix it. It penalizes good schools that work hard and then sends more money into the city where they're absolutely failing. So we've got to find a better solution. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Thank you. Anyone? I have a couple of questions, but I want to make sure everyone else has. So one of the frustrations that I have come across during my short tenure in Harrisburg is, and this isn't just relating to education funding, this is pretty much funding across the board. We look at funding and solving problems as a snapshot in time instead of looking at it as though it's a movie or a motion picture. And what I mean by that is we look at it to solve the immediate problem instead of understanding the unintended consequences that are going to occur because of how we're incentivizing people through funding, how we're going to incentivize behavior through funding. And with this, I see your background, Mr. Macri. I hope that's how you pronounce your name. I've heard it 3 different ways today, and I apologize for that. I'm not great at pronunciations myself. And your background is sales. And sales, I'm not sure exactly what that entails, but I know business well enough to know. I've been in business. I am in business. To know that sales is based off of commission, because the commission is an incentive for the individual to go out there and do the work and get the job done. It almost seems like with this proposal and with other proposals within Harrisburg, and I'm not claiming that this is the intended consequence of it, but we are incentivizing bad behavior. I'm concerned that with funding formulas like this, we'll continue to incentivize poor behavior. What incentive is there for a school district to be more frugal? What incentive is there to be more cognizant of your local taxpayers? Is that your impression with this particular funding formula?
If you look at my third point, that's exactly the impression. Those school districts that don't have kids getting arrested, kids that are graduating, academic improvement after year after year, they're the ones that should be where the incentive is. So the better you do, the more money you get. I mean, that's just like this. Here's what's happening. I thought about this. A sales guy who is outperforming and making more than the CEO, the managers change his sales structure to reduce his commission. A lot of times in industry. Have you ever seen that? No? Does it happen? Yeah. It happens. You know, because the sales guy's making too much money. So they change the sales commission structure. And good guys leave. You know, if we can't pay our teachers, good teachers will leave. If we can't pay our support staff, good support staff will leave. So there's got to be incentive for us to do, you know, just to be really good at spending our money, your money, taxpayers' money, whose ever money. But it's backwards. It's just backwards, it seems.
On that same point, I know they attached on a voucher reform onto this bill. And I'm not necessarily for how vouchers are currently done, and I do think there needs to be more review of that. But vouchers and allowing parents to decide where they send their students, that incentivizes public schools to do their best. And that is how I think we need to move forward. We need to incentivize schools to perform better, put out a better product, make better students, keep their taxes lower, and control their administration costs. You need to be able to have those options to drive reform, right? I don't want to see cyber schools take over the world because I don't think that's the right success. I think the right path is through the public education system. Every student gets that opportunity and has a world in front of them to choose what they want to do. But you need to incentivize everyone to do their best. And sometimes it's just like, oh, we're going to get more money next year. Let's just add on. And there's no repercussions. There's no metrics. We need to be able to measure that or put some kind of performance system in place that incentivizes the results we want to see or encourage.
Yeah, and I wasn't intending on talking about charter schools or cyber schools, but so in Beaver County, where I live, there is a pretty robust charter school network that's developed over the course of the last 20 years, and I got to say, it has made the public schools better. We have good public schools that are thinking outside the box, that are keeping students there because of the competition. And that competition does breed progress. And comfort, I think, is the enemy of progress. And if we're too comfortable without incentives to drive and to have people think outside the box, I think you're right. I think it'll help everybody across the board. So thank you. Thank you all very much for your testimony today. Representative Rinkovich, if you'd like to give a brief closing remark, and I'll give a brief closing remark, and we'll gavel us out here.
Thank you to the testifiers today, and certainly we got ourselves, you know, we got the attention we wanted. We got a crowd. We have people talking about this, and that's exactly what we wanted. Because what I want to close with is exactly what I opened with, and that's the process. This was an 87-page bill that was ran on the statutory minimum out of committee. This was introduced and voted on in 24 hours. 107 state representatives voted that students in Crestwood are worth less than school districts in Wilkes-Barre and Hazleton. We're not talking about Philadelphia. I know there's a lot of talks about Philadelphia. These are school districts that are 10 minutes away. And I do have school districts that win in this proposal. And that's great. But if we're going to go and we're going to change a 7-year funding policy because the judicial system said we have to, then we should do it right the first time. We shouldn't be creating winners and losers. There shouldn't be losers. We heard here that, we hear from the other side, I should say, that Crestwood does get something in this. They do get money. They get more money this year than they get last year. And we just heard that the extra money they got barely even covers the inflation of daily operating expenses. Your health care doesn't get covered in this proposal. But guess what? It's not over. June 30th is when our budget is due. The Senate still has to take up this budget. They're going to make their changes to it, and it's going to come back to the House. And that is why we're all here today. A lot of people think we're here to just talk negatively on a bill and say that it's right versus left. That's not what we did. Maybe that's what they did when they ran this out of committee, hoping to get roll call votes for political campaigns. We're here to start the conversation because this is a bicameral system. This budget bill is going to come back. We're going to negotiate, and we want to make sure that we have the best possible funding to all of our students. And so thank you very much for everyone who was here. It is exactly everything we needed, and I appreciate that.
Representative, thank you for your leadership on this issue, your advocacy on this issue, and others in Harrisburg. And you hit the nail on the head. This isn't a right issue. It's not a left issue. This is a student's issue. This is about what's best for our children as we go forward. And how do we fund our students best going forward so that they have the most opportunities coming out of this Commonwealth everywhere in the Commonwealth, regardless of their zip codes. So I appreciate your work on this issue. The Policy Committee will be meeting next Monday, June 17th, for the continuation of our series on the historic tax cuts. Until then, this committee is adjourned.